Hi everyone, welcome to the Jayda InStitches show. If you're in the US of A, Thanksgiving is on the way. In fact, it'll be here next week. So if you are hosting or helping host a party this year, then today's tutorial is perfect for your festive table. In fact, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, you're still very much in late fall. And if you're having a party or a Sunday dinner, then if you want to set a fancy table, we've got you covered today. What am I talking about? Napkin rings. So on a live stream a couple of weeks ago, we were making our little chibi, chubby, tubby turkey, link in the description box. And Crocus mentioned it would make a really cute little front to a table ring or napkin ring holder. And I loved that idea. Realized we hadn't done napkin rings in quite a long time here on the channel. We have one other tutorial for very fancy, festive napkin rings. I'll link that down below as well. But today we're going to do something simple, fun, super cute, and 4 different designs. So this is a Thanksgiving set of napkin rings. I'm going to show you how to make the ring itself, which is 12 centimeters or 4 3/4 inches in diameter. So it fits a standard napkin, a bigger napkin. It's got a little bit of stretch. You could possibly even stick your cutlery in there if that's the way you like to set your table. We're going to do a little leaf to decorate one. The next one we're going to do is a little sunflower. So sunflowers still out there in some parts of the Northern Hemisphere. A pumpkin, very fitting for the Thanksgiving table for our third. And this year's brand new little design, a turkey. We've got tutorials for the leaf in various sizes, plus the little sunflower and the pumpkin. I'll link those full tutorials down below if you want to see them in greater depth, but I'm going to do every single one of these designs in this tutorial. So this tutorial has all 4 designs plus the napkin ring holder in it. And so let's grab our hooks, we'll grab our yarn, we'll head on over to the craft table, and we're going to stitch up a whole new Thanksgiving set of napkin rings together. For a set of 4 napkin ring holders, you really don't need a whole lot of yarn. I've chosen to use cotton for this project. I'm using 24/7 cotton by Lion brand. This is a size 4 medium weight cotton, but you can also use a lightweight or a size 3 cotton. You could use 100% wool, or you could use a wool cotton blend. For each ring, you need around 4 yards. I'm going to be using red for my rings. So if you're making a set of 4, 40 yards of your chosen color for the actual rings. And then for the turkey, around 6 yards of brown, 2 yards of orange, 1 yard of white, very small amounts. The sunflower, maybe a yard of brown, 5 yards of yellow. For the pumpkin, 5 yards of orange, a yard of brown, and for the leaf, about 4 yards of green. The colors I'm using in today's tutorial are Lion brand 24/7 in yellow, lemon, tangerine, red, grass, cafe au lait, and white. I've got a pair of scissors, a yarn needle. You might find a stitch marker handy for this, and I'm using a 4.5 millimeter hook, also known as a size 7. And once you've got all that together, we can get started. Let's start with the actual ring. This is the base onto which we put all of our little decorations. We're going to start with a slip knot, and we're going to chain 7. We're going to skip the first chain from the hook, half double crochet into the next chain, and we're going to half double crochet in each chain across. So we'll have 6 stitches at the end of row 1, and we're going to be using half double crochet for the whole napkin ring. This is just the actual ring we're building. So that's 6 half double crochet stitches at the end of row 1. Chain 1, turn. Your chaining 1 does not count as a stitch, it's just your turning chain, so you're always going to skip it. You're going to half double crochet into each actual stitch across, so each of the half double crochet stitches from the previous row get a half double crochet stitch for the next row. You'll still have 6 stitches at the end of row 2, and we're going to be going back and forth, making a tube. So chain 1, turn, half double crochet in each stitch all the way across, and you're going to want to do this for 12 rows. At the end of row 12, this piece should measure approximately 12 centimeters or 4 3/4 inches long. You're going to chain 1 at the end of row 12. You're going to bring your short ends together, and we're going to slip stitch through each set of stitches. So through the last stitch of row 12, through the last chain of the foundation chain row. We're going to just slip stitch the whole thing together to create a seam. So you're slip stitching through each pair of stitches. You'll have 6 chains or slip stitches at the end of this little seam, one for each set of stitches. Try not to crochet too tightly. And remember that last one is always a little bit off the end. There we go. All 6. Now you can decide to leave this, since we're going to be covering it with a little goodie anyway, or you can flip the whole thing inside out. You can fasten off. And you want to weave in your little tails. And like I said, you can leave it this way, and we're going to be putting our little decorations on the seam, or you can flip it inside out and it's more hidden, and we're still going to be putting our little decorations on the seam. So if you like that nice, almost invisible join, flip the whole thing inside out. But don't forget to weave in all of your little short tails first, and you want to make 4 of these for the set of 4. Once you've got a set of 4 rings, they'll measure approximately 4 3/4 inches or 12 centimeters in diameter, and of course they've got a little bit of stretch to them. You can put these 4 aside, and now we can work on the decorations. We're going to begin with the leaf. We're going to take our green yarn, make a slip knot, and we're going to chain 5. You're going to skip the first chain from the hook, slip stitch into the next chain, single crochet into the next chain, half double crochet into the next chain, and into the last chain you're going to work 5 double crochets. I'm going to work over top of my short tail, and you can really see that that's 5 double crochets worked into the last chain. I may open it up a little bit, but don't worry about it. It will disappear when we are getting to the end of our little leaf. We're going to work up the underside of those foundation chains now. So this was the last chain, the one with the big space. Into the next one we're going to work a half double crochet, and I'm going to work over top of that little short tail. A single crochet into the next stitch, and then a slip stitch into the very last stitch. So these little stitches will all line up with the stitches opposite them. Chain 1 up at the top, and you can worry about weaving in that short tail in a moment. Now we're going to do some surface slip stitching all the way back down through the middle of this leaf, and you can see the spaces that have opened up between the stitches. That's sort of what the spaces are left from the foundation chains. So you're going to hold your leaf, you're going to aim for that first little space, slip your hook right through it, grab the yarn from behind the leaf, and pull it right up and through the loop on your hook. Don't pull too tightly. Find the next space, grab your yarn from behind, and pull it up through everything. And the next space, grab your yarn, your surface chaining. Basically a slip stitch, it's just that it's going through the piece of fabric as opposed to around the edge. And you're going to get like this nice little slip stitching vein running down the middle of the leaf. You're going to find the middle double crochet of those 5 double crochets you made at the bottom. You're going to slip stitch through the top of it. That will be a slightly longer chain, so just give yourself a little bit of looseness. Chain 1, and then you can fasten off. Leave yourself about 20 centimeters, 8 inches or so of yarn, because you're going to need a little bit of yarn now to do a bit of sewing as we attach our leaves or our little applique pieces to the tops of our napkin rings. We're not going to do that just yet. Flip your little leaf over and you can weave in that remains of the short tail back through some of those stitches. Remember to leave that long tail right where it is. You're going to use that later. And then you can do a little bit of shaping with your fingers. Grab the point, pull it out, and that's a little leaf. Let's move on to the sunflower now. We're going to start with our brown because we're going to make our sunflower from the center out. We're going to begin with a cinch circle. So we're just going to cross our yarn, put our hook through the circle, pick up a loop, and chain one, and that will secure the circle. We want to work over top of the little short tail. We're going to work 8 single crochet into the circle over top of that little short tail. So that's 8 single crochet all worked into that circle. Take that little tail, cinch it up nice and tight. You're going to join with a slip stitch to the first single crochet. Might be a little tight, that's okay. There we go. So now you'll have 8 single crochet stitches all the way around plus the little false stitch. So where you've joined, you've got like this little space here, right underneath there, and the false stitch. It'll equal 9. 8 or 9, perfectly fine. Just remember that. 8 or 9 is perfectly fine. You're going to fasten off and leave yourself 8 inches, 20 centimeters of this yarn. That's for sewing a little later on because we're going to be using the brown part of our sunflower to sew it down to our napkin ring. And you can weave this little tail in or you can work over top of it. But you want to make sure you leave this long tail out. You can grab your yellow yarn now, so we're all done with the brown. We're going to take our yarn, make a slip knot on our hook. I want to join my yarn in the false stitch. So you've got this little stitch, that's your slip stitch that you've sort of fastened off with. I'm going to join right here, and then I'm going to work over top of this short tail. So remember, you're going to leave your long tail out of the way. And I'm just going to kind of pull that to the side. I'm going to join with a slip stitch. And we're going to make our first little petal. We're going to chain 2. Skip the first chain from the hook and slip stitch into the second chain. Slip stitch back into the same place that you joined your yarn in, and that makes a little petal. I'm going to leave my long tail out of the way, and I'm going to work over top of both the short brown tail, see if I can isolate it, there it is, and my little yellow tail. Okay, let's make another little petal together. I'm going to slip stitch now into the same stitch that I joined in, so this is going to be right next door. You're going to see it right there. So I'm going to make sure that I get underneath all those little tails and chain 2. Skip the first chain from the hook, slip stitch into the next chain, and slip stitch down into the same place that you just slip stitched out of. And that's 2 little petals. Slip stitch into the next stitch along row 1 and repeat. Chain 2, skip the first chain from the hook, slip stitch into the second chain, and slip stitch back into the same place that you just chained out of. So every little stitch around the middle, and I'm always working over top of my little short tails. It's just kind of a way to work them in without having to do a whole lot of weaving in later. It also nicely kind of makes for a slightly fatter sunflower. Slip stitch into the next stitch, chain 2, skip the first stitch, slip stitch into the second stitch, and slip stitch back onto what was row 1. And you're going to do this all the way around. If you see a stitch, you slip stitch into it, chain 2, slip stitch into the second chain from the hook, slip stitch back into the same place that you just worked away from, and you will have 9 if you use the false stitch, 8 if you only used the 8 single crochets, but honestly, the number of petals that you have around your little flower doesn't matter. Aim for 9, but if you can only manage 8, that's fine. If you manage to squeeze in one more and end up with 10, that's fine too. I don't think you could ever have too many petals around a little sunflower. Once you're all the way back at the beginning, you're going to put your hook in the same place that you originally joined your yarn with and slip stitch. That will close off that little row. You can snip your yarn. You don't need much tail on the yellow because we're not actually doing any sewing with that. I'm going to make sure all of my little tails are to the back. There we go. Flip it over and make sure that your long tail is still available for you to use. I'm going to first work my little yellow tail in underneath. So I want to kind of weave in my little yellow tail first. There we go. I can take that short tail, the brown tail, and just weave it in under a couple of stitches across the back here. But then I'm going to trim the rest because I worked over top of that little short tail for most of that little flower. So I've just woven it, kind of pulled it in under a stitch. I'm going to trim it. Careful not to snip any of your actual stitches. Go around, pull out each of those little petals. And now you've got a little sunflower. This brown tail here will be used for sewing a little later. And then you can just continue to weave in what's left of your yellow stitch or your yellow yarn. And if you really feel you've woven it in enough, maybe you've gone all the way around all of your petals at least once, you could just trim whatever's left. And there's our little sunflower. Next we're going to make our pumpkin. We're going to take our orange, and we're going to make a cinch circle. So you're going to take your yarn, cross it to make a loop, hook goes through the loop, grab the long tail, and chain 1 to secure it. We're going to work all of the stitches in row 1 over top of our short tail so we can cinch it up nice and tight. We're going to single crochet once into the circle, then 4 double crochets all into the circle, working over top of that short tail. And then we're going to do it again. Single crochet and 4 double crochet. Again, all into the circle, all over top of that short tail. So that's single crochet, 4 double crochet, single crochet, 4 double crochet, all worked into that little circle. You're going to take the short tail, cinch it up nice and tight, and we're going to join with a slip stitch to the first single crochet. And that is row 1 complete. Okay, we're going to work 4 half double crochet, I should say 2 half double crochet into each of the next 4 stitches. So you've got 4 double crochet stitches. So you've joined in the single crochet, and immediately you're working half double crochets into each of those next 4 stitches, which were all double crochets from the previous row. So no chaining, just right into half double crochet. 2 half double crochet in each of the next 4 stitches. I'm working over top of my short tail just because I like to do that. It saves me weaving it in later. 2 half double crochet in each of those 4 stitches. That brings you to the little single crochet down at the bottom. You're going to slip stitch into that. And then you're going to work 2 half double crochet into each of the remaining 4 stitches, which were double crochets from the previous row. So I'm still working over that short tail. 2 half double crochet in each of those remaining 4 stitches. There we go. And then you're going to slip stitch back into the same place that you slip stitched to join the previous row, which is the top of that single crochet from row 1. That gives us a little pumpkin-y shape. You can snip your yarn, or actually before you do that, let's just pull that loop from front to back. So take your hook out of the loop, insert it from the back through to the front, grab your loop, you can tighten it up a little bit, pull it to the back. There we go. And there you can fasten off, and you're doing it on the back of the pumpkin. You're going to leave a little bit of tail, 10 inches, 25 centimeters or so, maybe a little less. You don't need that much. Fasten off. If you have any of that little short tail still showing, you can weave it in. Otherwise, leave that long tail for doing a little sewing, and you should have a little gentle pumpkin shape. We're going to add just a little bit of a stem. So you're going to grab your brown yarn, put a slip knot on your hook, and right in that same place, so right up here, just below that slip stitch, kind of into the first stitch, that single crochet from row 1, just slip your hook in. You're going to join with a slip stitch, and real quick, chain 3, skip the first chain from the hook, slip stitch into the second chain, slip stitch into the third or last chain, and then slip stitch right back into the same place you joined your yarn. Same thing, we're going to take our hook, bring it back in from behind, grab that loop, pull it to the back, and then, let's not split our yarn, you can fasten off back there. You don't need much tail. I'm going to get that orange tail out of the way. Fasten off. There we go. And just to be safe, I like to take those 2 little tails, knot them together. And of course this is on the back. This is the back of the pumpkin. There we go. Pull up on that stem. Make sure that's a nice tight knot. You can take those tails from the stem and just pull them underneath 1 or 2 loops at the back of the pumpkin and then trim. We're going to be sewing the pumpkin onto one of our napkin rings, and it will pretty much be sewn over top of these little tails, so you don't have to worry about them inching their way out. And I'm just going to trim these. Again, be careful not to actually snip your stitches. There we go. And that is our little pumpkin, complete with sewing tail. Next, we're going to make our turkey. With our brown yarn, we're going to make a cinch circle. That first chain secures the circle, and we're going to chain 2 more. And this chain 3 is the height of a double crochet, but will not count as a double crochet. Into this little ring, we're going to work 12 double crochet stitches, making sure that each stitch is worked over top of that little short tail. Once you have 12 double crochet worked into that little circle, grab the short tail, cinch it up nice and tight, and you're going to skip over top of the chain 3 and join with a slip stitch to the top of the first real double crochet. So that chain 3 doesn't count, it just creates a little bit of filler so that we have a nice even circle when we join. You're going to pull up on your working loop. You are not going to cut your brown yarn yet because we're not done with it, but you are going to grab your orange. We're going to take our orange yarn and put a slip knot on our hook, and we're going to start making some tail feathers. You are going to hold your turkey circle, and you're going to look at where you joined your yarn, and you're going to count backwards 1, 2, 3 stitches to the right if you're working right-handed. This will be to the left if you're working left-handed. So 3 stitches away in the opposite direction from where you fastened off. Join your yarn with a slip stitch in that 3rd chain and work 3 double crochet into the same stitch. So slip stitch, 3 double crochet, and slip stitch all into the same stitch. Slip stitch, 3 double crochet, slip stitch into the same stitch. Into the next stitch, you're going to slip stitch, work 3 double crochet, and slip stitch all into the same stitch. So you can see you've got some little tail feathers now starting. Into the next stitch, which will be the stitch just before your little pulled up working loop, you're going to do the same thing. Slip stitch, 3 double crochet, and slip stitch all into the same stitch. Now, you're going to take your working loop from row 1, pull up on it so you just tighten it a bit, pull it forward so you can pull everything forward, leave your tail, your working tail to the back, but pull the working loop forward, and you're going to slip stitch across. So you're going to skip over top of that working loop, you're going to skip over the join, and you're going to slip stitch into the next stitch. So this is my short tail. It's okay if I work over top of it. I want my working brown yarn to the back. I'm going to grab my orange, and I'm slip stitching, but not too tightly. So if you see, like, I've kind of made that slip stitch a little loose, and I'm keeping my working yarn loop to the front. So it's to the front. I've done a slightly loose slip stitch over top of it, and I've slip stitched into the next stitch on the other side, and I'm going to work 3 double crochet into that same place, and this is my little short tail. I'm just working over top of it, but I'm not working over top of the working brown yarn, and slip stitch, and then you're going to do the same thing into each of the next 2 stitches. Slip stitch, 3 double crochet, and slip stitch. So slip stitch, 3 double crochet, slip stitch, all into the same stitch. That makes a little tail feather for us. We've got 3 on one side of our working loop from row 1 and 3 on the other side. There we go. So once again, slip stitch, 3 double crochet, slip stitch into 1, 2, 3 stitches, skip over top of your working loop, keeping your working loop to the front, and then slip stitch, 3 double crochet, slip stitch into 1, 2, 3 stitches down the other side. You can now fasten off that orange yarn and take a moment to weave that tail in across the back, and maybe weave in your little short brown tail too, just to keep things neat and tidy. All right, we've got 6 little tail feathers started around our main body. We have not finished with our brown yarn. Our working loop is to the front, our working brown yarn is to the back, but we did weave in the little tails of the orange tail feathers because we're done with the orange. Now we're going to do a little highlighting around the tops of the feathers with our white yarn. So let's not tangle our yarns here. We're going to grab our white, put a slip knot on our hook. In that first stitch, which was actually a slip stitch at the bottom of what was row 2, so all the way back down on tail feather number 1, you're going to join with a back loop only, slip stitch, back loop only. So if this is the whole stitch here, that's the whole stitch. You want the back loop only, join with a slip stitch. I'm going to work over top of my little white short tail. And now back loop only, we're going to single crochet back loops only into each of those double crochets of the first tail feather. So back loop only back loop only single crochet in the top of each of those double crochets. Into the slip stitch in between, you're going to slip stitch into that tiny little slip stitch in between. And I know there's 2, but you're just going to find 1. You're just slip stitching down between the feathers. And then you're going to find those 3 double crochets in the next tail feather and back loop only single crochet across each of those 3 double crochet stitches. So back loop only, single crochet, back loop only is the loop that's always furthest away from you. You're going to slip stitch down in between. So slip stitch into one of those slip stitches down in between the feathers. There we go. And you're going to get a little bit of definition that looks like this. Back loop only, single crochet into the tops of those double crochets of tail feather number 3. And the back loop only gives us a little bit of flexibility, so we don't have to work too many extra stitches in there. Into that long skipped slip stitch that we did over top of the working loop, you're going to back loop only slip stitch, and then back loop only single crochet into the next 3 double crochets from tail feather number 4. Get your hook down into that slip stitch between the tail feathers and slip stitch. Back loop only single crochet into each of the next 3 stitches of tail feather number 5. Slip stitch down in between those 2 feathers. There we go. And you've got 1 tail feather left. You're going to back loop only single crochet into the remaining 3 double crochets of that tail feather before you back loop slip stitch into the little slip stitch at the very edge of row 2. That's the last tail feather. You can fasten off. Take a moment to weave that little tail in underneath the white stitches across the back. And if you still have a little bit of that beginning white tail, you can weave them both in. And your turkey tails will look something like this. We are going to get back to our brown yarn now. So you're going to put your hook into your working loop, which again is on the front of your turkey. Your working tail is on the back, and that's exactly where we want it to be. We are going to, from this position, chain 4. So your first chain is worked right over top of your tail feather piece. So that chain will sit right over top of the tail feather, and then you've got 3 more chains above it. You're going to skip the first chain from the hook. You're going to half double crochet into the second chain from the hook, half double crochet into the next chain, half double crochet into the chain that sits over top of those tail feathers, and slip stitch right back into where row 1 was joined, right down here. And then you can pull up on that little headpiece. Pull up on your working loop, take your hook, bring it from the back to the front, grab the loop, pull it down to the back, and then you can tighten it up. You can fasten off and leave yourself a nice bit of tail, maybe 30 centimeters to 12 inches. Make that a nice tight knot. There we go. So this is the head. It sits out in front of our little tails, little tail feathers. Our fastened off tail is what we're going to use to sew it down to our napkin ring. And now, this is optional, but you can take a little length of yellow yarn and your yarn needle. Bring your needle in from the behind, so the wrong side, around through the middle section of what's the head. Leave a little tail out the back, hop over a loop, maybe part of a stitch, bring it back to the other side, and if you want, you can do it twice just to create like a little bit of a beak, the idea of a beak. So 1 or 2, it's entirely up to you. Like I said, this is optional, but I feel like it just kind of sells it. It makes it look like there's a little bit of a beak. There you go. Knot those two ends together on the back of the head. Not too tightly because you don't want to accidentally pull the little stitches out of alignment. There we go. Double check that you haven't pulled anything on the other side, and then you can just take those two little tails and kind of just pull them down into the back. So get them to sort of like hide behind some of these stitches on the back side of your turkey. Maybe kind of run them right underneath. Pull them down into the back middle. That's one. There we go, and that's 2. And I'm just going to leave them kind of hanging out there because when I'm sewing down the turkey, they're going to get covered up. Pull your little turkey into shape. If you have to, you can just get your needle underneath those little beak loops. There we go. And we have a little turkey. Now we've got 4 little decorations for our 4 little napkin rings. I've got them sitting on top of what is the seam, the underside of the seam. Remember, I flipped my napkin rings inside out so that the seam is the visible seams on the inside, but I'm still going to be stitching my little decorations over top of the seam of the napkin ring. I've got them in location. I've got my long sewing tails ready to go. Now it's time for some quick assembly. Let's begin with our leaf. You're going to thread up the long tail you left on your leaf in your yarn needle. And we don't need to sew all the way around the outside. Instead, we want our little decorative pieces to kind of have a little bit of movement to them. So you're going to reach down underneath where the stem of your leaf is, directly underneath it. Bring your yarn up right through the leaf. And right across the center of your leaf, you're just going to go in and out through the top of the leaf, but you're only going to be grabbing a loop or a couple loops of a stitch on the top of your little napkin ring holder so that the stitching doesn't show through to the inside. Now, if the stitching does end up showing through to the inside, it's really not the end of the world. I just feel that this is a nice, neat habit to be in. If you can have invisible stitching, why not have it? So I'm just working my way up through the middle section. Because this is all the same color, it's not going to show. I go through the leaf, I go through a couple of loops on the top of the little napkin ring holder, and the top of my napkin ring and the top of my leaf, like the leaf sticks out above it, so that's fine. I'm just going to sort of double back through to the back of my leaf. Just grab one more little loop back here just to secure it. Now if you wanted to be really secure, you could go all the way around. You could do a few more stitches across the back, but I like this just being attached at the stem or the vein of the leaf because it just gives it a little bit more interest, a little bit more movement. It makes it feel a little bit, I don't know, real, I suppose. Then you're going to make a quick knot. Make that nice and tight. And then you can weave the tail in back and forth underneath some of the stitches of the actual leaf. Back and forth a couple times, don't pull anything too tightly, and then trim whatever's left over. When you're trimming your tails, be very careful not to snip any of your actual stitches. And then always finish with a little bit of shaping. And there is our first napkin ring holder all done. We're going to use much the same technique for all of the sewing on these little napkin rings. You're going to thread up the tail left on your sunflower, position it in the middle of your napkin ring over top of the little seam, and using the underside of the stitches of sort of at the base of the petals around row 1, so just underneath where the petals connect to row 1, you're going to grab the top loops of a stitch on the napkin ring and then go through the bottom of the loops of a stitch on the sunflower. Again, grab the top loops of a stitch, doesn't matter if it's 1 or 2, on the little napkin ring. Grab the next loops on the flower, and you're going to do this all the way around. Try to grab the loops of the napkin ring that are almost directly below the loops that sit on the sunflower. And if you feel it's easier to sew all the way through to the center of the napkin ring and back out again, that's okay too. I just like this method because it typically keeps all of the little tails and stitches from showing through to the other side, and I just like how neat and tidy that looks. If while you're sewing you kind of knock any little tails out of position, you can tuck them back in later or just trim them. When you're finished, you can make a little knot back here, either knot it around the last little loop on the bottom of the sunflower, or part of the yarn that you kind of use to sew it down. Either way, you just need one little tiny loop. You're going to make one little knot, and then you can bring your yarn through to the front or do more yarn sort of. You can also weave it in underneath those petals again a little bit more. I like these stitches because they're kind of on the tight side since they were the row 1 stitches. Just get your needle underneath a handful of them. Weave them in through a few of those stitches. Like I said, they're nice and tight. And I like this too because it will kind of make the center of the sunflower kind of sit up a little bit. you can't do too many at once, then there we go. Let's do those. It gives it a little bit more of a three-dimensional look. And once you're done, you can pull it through to the other side and trim any excess. Again, be careful not to snip your other stitches. And as always, do a little bit of finishing blocking. If you have any other little tails, you can tuck them back in or trim them. And that's the sunflower. The pumpkin is done exactly the same way as the sunflower. Thread up your tail. You're going to use the top facing loops of the stitches of your napkin ring and the bottoms of some stitches along the underside of your pumpkin. Just keep making sure that your pumpkin isn't going to move. And you can use the bottom of row 2 or the bottom of row 1, but you're using the underside of those stitches, and that way none of your sewing will show through to the front, none of your sewing will show through to the inside of the napkin ring. Once you get all the way back around to the beginning, make a little knot, weave in your tail, and trim any excess. Once you're finished trimming and sewing, same thing, make sure that it's got a nice little position on the front of your napkin ring, and that's the pumpkin done. The turkey is done exactly the same way as the pumpkin and the sunflower. You're going to thread up that brown tail, and you're going to use all of the stitches across the back of row 1, or you can use the underside of the stitches of row 2 where they connect to row 1. You're going to use the top facing loops of your napkin ring holder or your napkin ring. Make sure that it doesn't move around on you. I like to kind of keep my thumb and forefinger in place, and then every so many stitches I check it to make sure that it hasn't moved on me. I'm going to use a couple loops on the back of that row 2, and then make sure that I'm getting loops that are relatively close to that stitch. I make sure that it hasn't moved. I grab a couple of the next loops. I'm using the underside of those stitches, and that way none of my sewing will show through to the front of my turkey. Make sure that it hasn't moved. And I'm going to do this all the way around. So when I get to the bottom, I'm going to use the bottom or the back of the stitches of the base of the turkey, and then I'm going to use the stitches running up the inside of the turkey on the other side of his feathers. I'm going to knot over here like I did with the other two, weave my tail in a little bit around the middle of my turkey, trim any excess, and that will be my new set of Thanksgiving napkin rings all stitched up. Once you've finished sewing, knotting your end, and weaving in your little tail, same thing, just fluff up your little tail feathers, straighten your little head, and that is the turkey all done. And there you go, 4 new napkin ring designs, just perfect for your Thanksgiving table, or let's face it, a fall table of any kind. In fact, there's a couple here that I might just continue using right up and including Christmas Certainly my turkey, I think, would suit it. But I love these. I think they're so adorable. And I feel like this opens the door for other designs down the road. So stay tuned because I have a couple more ideas up my sleeve. Love the idea of napkin rings. I'd like to thank Crocus for putting that idea in my head. And I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. If you've got questions or ideas for napkin rings yourself, please feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. And if you're interested in picking up today's written pattern, it includes the napkin ring and all 4 of today's little designs. The whole thing is in one pattern. You'll find it in our Etsy shop, and we've got a link to that in the description box down below as well. A humongous thank you, a gigantic happy Thanksgiving to everybody in the US. Happy holidays, here we go. We are on the downward slide of the year. We are heading into the crazy bustle of the holiday season. I absolutely love it. And I don't know, I just love being able to stay up late and do a whole bunch of last minute little things for my table and my decor and my shelves and maybe a little something in the kitchen. It just makes me happy and it just feels so cozy. And considering that the weather is taking a nosedive, cozy is where it's at. So we hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. We will see you again soon here on the Jayda and Stitches show. Until then, stay safe, stay crafty, and have a great week. Bye guys!
Hi everybody, Mr. and Stitches here. Thank you for watching today. Here are some of our other videos you might be interested in. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe.